Good evening, Tiger. Thank you for joining me for my first Fireside Chat of 2022. Since it's a new year, I want to share a couple of reminders about these chats, if you haven't been watching for a while. First is I host them on the first Thursday of each month, typically. There's occasionally a time when we have to move them due to scheduling conflicts, but most of the time they're on the first Thursday of the month at 6:30 p.m. Also want to remind you that you can submit questions ahead of time or during the chat. Either one of those works just fine. I'm going to start providing some updates to begin with. And really the main purpose of these chats is to hear from you, your questions, your comments, and your suggestions. So please put those into the various formats that you may be watching. We're broadcasting on multiple channels and venues tonight. So put your questions and comments in so we can have an interactive session. And if I don't have the answers tonight, we'll make sure that we get you the answers and follow up with you. So go ahead and submit your questions and we'll get to them after a couple of quick updates. The first update I have for you is actually really, in my mind, really exciting. We got a lot of feedback from community members about the lights in downtown Tigard, and it's been traditionally called Light the Night, and many people have seen the white lights on the trees on Main Street, and this has been part of a new initiative called Light the Night, and they help celebrate the holiday season and light the night for downtown businesses throughout the cold winter months. And so community members gave us feedback and said, why did they come down, or why aren't they up any longer, and you know, you should do that longer or all year round. So we've heard that feedback and coordinated with our Public Works department, and I'm excited to announce that tonight we are going to be keeping those up. It sounds like probably about 6 months of the year, so during the winter time, roughly around when daylight savings time changes in both directions. So they'll go up in the fall and down in March, April. I think mid-March now is when that will probably happen. And the reason they can't be up all year round is because they will affect the growth of the trees, but having them up during the winter months is not a problem for that. So that's an exciting announcement, and I got to make that announcement tonight for the community. We also have an exciting weekend coming up. We're calling it Tigard's first weekend of service, and the Tigard community is coming together to honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. over the January 15th to 17th weekend through a series of volunteer events. There are many slots to sign up for various service activities. I would encourage you to register as soon as possible to ensure that you're not left out, and we want to make sure that everyone that wants to volunteer can. Also want to share some information about the police department and police communications. I think some of this request for feedback is actually coming from our Citizen Public Safety Advisory Board. So they're wanting to collect some information about how the police department's communicating and how the community receives news and information, what the community wants to hear about from the police department, and what ideas the community may have for strengthening our communications between the police department and our community. So you'll find a link to the survey where you can answer questions and provide input that will be valuable to both the police department leadership and the Public Safety Advisory Board. So with that, we'll go to some community questions. We'll start with a couple that we received a few over the last couple days. The first is a comment and a question. Whoever submitted this said they appreciate the city's work during the snow last week, and is there a reason we don't use salt on our streets? And I know historically there was a reason salt wasn't used in Oregon. I think this maybe has changed pretty recently in the last couple of years, but I don't think for environmental reasons that it was allowed until very recently. And right now the city does not have the equipment to apply salt or store the capacity that would be needed for the salt. So that is the reason we don't use it now. And I think historically it's not been used, or that we haven't been prepared to use it, more because it's not really been permitted. There were also, I think, over the last decade, we've, as the climate has changed, we have needed more of those services than we did historically. So another comment or question we have is that there's a lot of gravel and sand that are covering bike lanes, and when will that be taken care of? The first and second, here's the response from our public works staff. The first and second priority roads they have the most amount of rock on them, and this will take time, as our street sweeping contractor can only handle so much workload, but the roads have been made a priority, and there will be roads that will take longer before they're swept, but they'll be done in the normal rotation of the sweeper. And I will remind you, since we're talking about street sweeping, that the reason that we do street sweeping is not, it's important for the topic and discussion here, but generally speaking, street sweeping is not a service we provide to make your streets look great or to pick up rocks after a storm. The main reason we do it is actually for water quality reasons, and the fact that to maintain our water quality to the federal government standards, it's actually an activity we have to undertake because everything that's on the roads ultimately ends up, if it doesn't get picked up, it ends up in our stormwater system. So that's the answer on that. We got a question just a bit ago about how much is collected on by our street maintenance fee on our utility bills. And the answer to that question, I did some rough math. I kind of knew the answer in round numbers, so I'm not going to be providing you a to the cent or the dollar answer tonight. But I can tell you that the street maintenance fee is in the $6-ish range now. And I did kind of my own internal quality checking on this answer, because I knew the number was between $1.2 and $1.5 million. And I did kind of the quick households times there's like 16,000 households or billing units for our utility billing, and that is, if you multiply that times 12 months and the $6 or approximately that, it comes out to be about that amount of money. I think it comes out to about $1.3 million. So we collect somewhere in that range. If you want a super precise answer, let us know. Hopefully that's close enough without digging out the exact dollar amount. And that is spent on street maintenance. So Tigard is, I think, really fortunate to have both city council and staff that over the last 15 years have figured out and made a commitment to taking care of our roads and streets in the most efficient way possible. And that means spending over the long run the least amount of money necessary to keep our roads in a really good condition. And it ultimately ends up being cheaper that way to maintain them instead of letting them get really bad. It's kind of like doing maintenance to your roof. If you do routine maintenance to your roof, it lasts much longer and you don't have to replace your roof every 10 years. Same kind of thing applies to road maintenance, and so we've done a really good job. I actually think that, I know many of our adjoining communities are pretty jealous of what we've been able to accomplish. Some of you may comment about how bad some of our roads are, like Hall Boulevard, for example. But Hall Boulevard doesn't belong to us. Hall Boulevard is not owned by the city of Tigard. It's currently owned by the state of Oregon and used to be Highway 217, long before current Highway 217 existed. And that may change over time, but that is the current situation. So You know, we've also had residents say, well, why don't you just fix it anyway? Because we all have to drive on it. And it's, you know, that is not a whole lot different than saying, why don't you pay for your neighbor's roof to be replaced? It's not our responsibility and not our asset. And so we don't spend our money maintaining other people's assets just like you don't in your house. It just doesn't make sense. So we're working with the state on that. Let's see, where are we at with questions about Highway 217? Have you tried congestion pricing? Unlike highway widening, it works. There is a lot of activity and discussion about congestion pricing in the Portland metropolitan area. Projects on both I-5 and 205. The legislature has essentially said will be paid for by a sort of a congestion pricing / tolling type of method. And that is the topic of a lot of conversation among leaders in the communities, frankly residents, particularly of communities along 205, who are concerned that there's not a lot of alternatives for them. And by that I mean there's not a lot of bus service, there's not a lot of north-south options or alternatives, and so they're very concerned about diversion of traffic into local neighborhoods and collector streets. So that's a bit on congestion pricing. Let's see, we've got Irene is asking about the Cedar Brook annexation. Why annexation first, then why 4 floors? As environmental study done to affect the business in residential? We're still getting the question in the residential zone. So I'm not specifically familiar with exactly what this question or specific annexation is about. So we'll have to get you more of a detailed response. So staff, I don't know if City Recorder Krager or Deputy City Recorder Raimundo are tracking this, but I would ask to, whichever of you is tracking, let's make sure we get Irene's contact information and get her a response. All right, Jeremy's asking about Steve Street Park, which you've asked about, and I think I just wrote a bunch of information in my Mayor's Corner that was just released and will be published more broadly in the next week. And I'm going to actually ask in response to that if one of the staff can copy the section about Steve Street Park into the chat. I think that would be the most efficient and detailed way to respond to that. And we've got some other questions rolling in. Kent?
Yep, we'll do that. As we do that, Olaf asked, Mayor Snider, please help to support legislation that would require tires during the cold time of year. In Europe, this has been standard for 10 plus years now, and here, not doing such legislation requires including supply chain shortages in grocery stores because of highway blockages that can be avoided. So
it sounds like this is a request for advocacy around requiring winter tires in the winter time. I'm assuming that's meaning maybe not just snow tires, because a lot of people have snow tires, but specifically studded tires during the winter time. That does have an impact on our transportation system and does do some or has some harmful effect on the roads, but not necessarily outweighing the benefit of it. So I will certainly take that, and I'll actually discuss that, since that would really be a state action that would need to be taken. I will bring that and happily bring that to a discussion with our state representative, Dacia Graber, and see what she thinks about that. I think there could be some benefits to it and also some negative impacts. So it's always a tough choice when you have something like that that's might solve one problem but create another. So happy to have that conversation with her and see what she thinks.
All right, Mr. Mayor, next question has to deal with houselessness. During the cold spell last week, what was the city doing to support the homeless folks that are residing in Tigard?
So a question about what we were doing to support houseless folks during the cold weather. First and foremost, we are supporting a number of agencies and nonprofits and faith-based organizations that are in the Tigard area that are providing shelter services during the cold weather events, and we're supporting them financially. We're supporting them in a number of different ways. And then also making sure that the library is open during the day. So we've got a place for people to go during the day that's warm, and then we also have shelter capacity at night. And the city's supporting both of those activities, and those are both really important. What else do we have?
The next question I had is about the Main Street, Green Street, and will that cause businesses to close in downtown Tigard?
So the Main Street, Green Street Phase 2 project, which is supposed to do the same type of improvements along Main Street that you see kind of south of the train tracks, are going to be extended north of the train tracks to get that whole area sort of rebuilt and restructured around the Main Street, Green Street concepts. Businesses will not be closed. They will be open and accessible, and that's a really important message that we want to continue to really emphasize and hammer on, frankly, because we want to make sure that the construction, while it's going to be great when it's done, it will make it a little more challenging during the construction phase. But businesses in downtown, in the area where construction's happening, will be open for business, and you're going to see us continue to push that message, and it's in my Mayor's Corner this month as well to emphasize.
With the uptick of the Omicron virus, what is the city doing in response to the increased number of cases in Washington County?
So we're continuing to message about things that we know work, so vaccines, masking, social distancing, or physical distancing. And so we're helping to push those messages. We're just promoting, I think, vaccine clinics at St. Anthony's in the last couple days. And we're going to continue to push that type of messaging from a broad community communication standpoint. The other things that we're doing, and it's caused us to reevaluate and change some of what we're planning to do. So we had planned, for example, to start having, in the room I'm sitting in, to start having in-person city council meetings starting earlier this week. And we didn't do that. We are back to virtual, or we never came back. We had one test session where we weren't conducting any business. We brought everybody into the council chambers on a night we didn't have a council meeting to sort of try to get used to how to use all the technology. There are some differences now in how we need to conduct our public meetings, even when we're all in person, to take virtual public comment, which is a new state requirement. Actually, I think a really positive thing that's come out of, if anything positives come out of the pandemic, that would be one of them. And so we were doing that, but we pivoted and are back to virtual meetings. So that's one impact. Reevaluating when and exactly how much staff and public facing counters at the city will be open. There are some high priority things the city manager and I have talked about where it's just very difficult to get the kind of service that you need. The permit desk is an example in the community development area. It's just been a struggle during the entire pandemic. And so I think the city manager's committed to trying to, even though Omicron is happening, trying to do that safely so that, but then things that we have more, I would say, are more optional like the council meetings being remote. We've gotten pretty good at remote council meetings. I know they exhaust people just being on video so much, but we can conduct the city's business effectively that way. We've done it for more than 20 months. So that's what's going on with Omicron. We also because of what's happening with our workforce and the impact on our workforce, people getting sick, even though it may be more mild typically, especially if they're vaccinated, we've bought a whole pallet of antigen tests, and we did that with using our money from the federal government because we need to be able to have rapid answers to whether someone's positive or not. And so that was available to us as a government entity, and we just made that purchase. It was like $14,000 worth of rapid antigen tests to make sure that we can continue testing our staff when they either have symptoms or when we need to be confident about what's going on in a situation. So that's what's going on with Omicron. I don't know if people have other specific questions, but
Mr. Mayor, that was a somewhat related question on the federal government funding. What else is the city doing with the funding that came down from the federal government?
So we have, first and foremost, we're continuing to support and make sure that our residents and businesses have what they need to thrive during the pandemic and be cared for. And that has taken a lot of different forms over the last 20 months or 21 months now. The latest round of funding, we have not spent the majority of that funding. The council has directed much of it to be used, at least the part that we've directed so far has been focused on the unhoused community and really on taking care of individuals and businesses that have been negatively impacted. That's our primary focus and direction, though we are looking at what other types of investments we may want to make, but I think we're pretty cautious. Like Omicron's a good example. Like we want to be cautious about making sure we don't spend all the money on things that we think are important but maybe are not as important as what happens as the pandemic continues. And we don't know whether we would get further federal funding. So once hopefully the pandemic comes to a close at some point, soonish maybe, and when that happens, we'll probably have a little more flexibility to be confident that we can spend some of the money in a more proactive investment way. But right now, we're just trying to make sure we get our community and the most vulnerable individuals and businesses in our community through the pandemic. There's a question about why was there a protester holding up a vulgar sign on Hall Boulevard last weekend? I guess I'll ask from the staff. I don't know anything about this, or I'm not sure I'm recognizing it. So does anybody know what the sign said?
We can look into that.
Okay, so don't know about the vulgar sign on Hall Boulevard last weekend, but you have me curious. I guess I'm wondering if it was in Tigard too, because not all of Hall Boulevard's in Tigard, so just gotta put that out there. All right, from YouTube, we've got a question. What changes have resulted from the committee reviewing police practices? So many things. There was actually a presentation at the council recently summarizing what work they've completed, and we can provide that information, I think, back to you in a link. So staff, please make sure that you get that into the comments on YouTube for that individual to review. There's just a lot of things. I'll highlight one. One was around body cameras. So we had traditionally what I would call pretty old equipment in our police cars. And by old equipment, I'm talking, think about cameras that are 15 to 17 years old, and what the difference in quality was there. We had some, not every vehicle had them. and some of them weren't operational. And then our school resource officers and the canine officer had sort of newer body camera equipment, and so did our traffic officers that are on motorcycles. They all had body cameras, which was not a lot of officers. So one of the decisions and recommendations that the Public Safety Advisory Board made pretty early was related to body-worn cameras for officers, and not only making the recommendation that we spend the money sooner than we'd been planning, which we did, but also a lot of the details and really reviewing the policies and practices around the use of the body cams. So that's an example of things that, I mean, you could say that was kind of overdue, but it hadn't been done, and it hadn't, the city had not made the decision to invest the money in the body camera system. And it's not just equipment, it's also the staff to process it. All that data has to be managed. And if you think about how many interactions one of our officers has in a day and how many officers we have on 3 different shifts, it's just a lot of data to manage. And it's not just, you can go look for it when you need it. That all has to be proactively cataloged and managed and available when needed. And it's not just for, the city's purposes. The public has a right to that information, and so do individuals that were contacted by the police department. So it's not an option to just, sort of collect it and then let it sit around in some disorganized manner, like perhaps my home videos and pictures on my cell phone are. All right, Dolly says Happy New Year to me, thank you. Let's see, from Facebook, we've got a question. The city of Portland has struggled to implement safe rest villages. Does the city foresee having sanctioned camps for those that are unsheltered? This is a really interesting question, and one that is, I would say, up for discussion. I actually was talking with a couple of people from Just Compassion recently about that topic. I don't know if it would be the kind of sort of camping situation you're describing there, or the both size and scope, and I guess what I would say is we're having discussions about safe lots. There is discussion about whether there should be, or it would be helpful to have some sort of a sanctioned camping, temporary housing type of situation. But what we really want to focus on, and I know we've had success actually recently, I think the police chief reported out on this, that that we've got one of our community services officers, Brandon Peterson, who's been working and developing rapport with houseless individuals. We've gotten 2 people in the last month or so into permanent housing. That's a success, and that's what we want to focus on. The size of our challenge is perhaps different than Portland's to some extent, but I would also say that no solutions are off the table at this point if they'll work and be effective. So let's see, Michael Antonelli's got a question, maybe outside the scope of a tiger discussion, but curious what we're seeing with Omicron in relation to my day job. Wow, so this afternoon, before I headed to City Hall, and before I quickly snarfed down some dinner before coming here, Omicron was changing my day and the future of my staff and surgeons as soon as next Monday. So what we are seeing is in my day job, I work as a healthcare leader, and we are seeing dramatic increases in the test positivity rate. That's been hovering for months, even through Delta, the Delta variant in the 4 to 5, 6, 7% range at most. And it's up to, I think, 27 or 28% in the population in the organization I work at. That's pretty dramatic, because every one of those, it doesn't increase linearly. If you can remember back to high school or college math, it's increasing exponentially transmission. So when you see a test positivity rate of 27%, you know that things are rapidly changing. However, Omicron is not causing as severe a disease as any of the prior variants by quite a bit. And so, we're the modeling, the best modeling that's available would indicate that near the end of January, in fact, I think it might be the last day of January, so January 31st is the predicted peak in Oregon related to Omicron. By that time, this is now me, I'm going to say I'm now going off the cuff a little bit. By that time, I think the prediction is that it will have just run its course, like kind of mowed everybody down that was going to get it, so to speak. And, the fact that it's not causing as severe a disease in most people as other variants is, I guess, really a good thing. But don't think that doesn't mean you don't need to get vaccinated, because it's having a pretty much greater impact and negative effect on people that are unvaccinated. And we're still, so while Delta wasn't as transmissible and had a bigger impact and required more people to be hospitalized and more of them in the ICU as opposed to in a lower level of care, there's just going to be sheer numbers, orders of magnitude different numbers in case counts, and that's going to drive hospitalizations that are a bit higher than Delta at the peak. So there may not be as many patients in the ICUs, but there will be more people hospitalized than there were with Delta at the end of January. At least that's what the modeling says. So, all right, I think we covered that. Jeremy says the city, specifically North Tigard, starting to look incredible, especially at night. Good job, everyone. I'm glad to hear that. I'm going to smile. I love Tigard for so many reasons. I've told the story many times before. My wife and I moved here right after we got married, kind of by accident, for a job I never took, and we never left. And I'm just very passionate about the city, and hearing Jeremy say that just makes me happy and smile. So, okay, from Twitter, we've got what's your advice for those looking for an at-home COVID test? Well, first of all, I will say that you may get lucky walking into a Walgreens or a CVS or a Rite Aid. We got lucky a few weeks ago and used them before the Christmas holiday. I think that's harder to get now. I will also say that we ordered a few more, kind of preparing for Omicron in our family. We ordered a few more on Amazon yesterday. They were a bit more expensive, but they were going to be delivered in the next week or two. So I think that's certainly a choice too. And then, more importantly, and I think this particularly for individuals that may not be able to afford paying for tests, the federal government has committed to standing up and I hope they're able to deliver on this, but they supposedly have a stockpile of 500 million antigen tests, rapid antigen COVID tests, that they're going to be prepared to ship to people for free pretty soon. So my understanding from what I read in media was that was going to be in the next couple of weeks. I'm not a federal leader and I don't want to promise that, but that's the news and information that's coming. And those would be, my understanding is, just shipped directly to you quickly. So certainly the federal government has resources it can use, whether it's military or others, and the best logistics people in the world. So I'm cautiously optimistic that gets delivered on as described in the media in the last week or two. Let's see, from Michelle on Facebook, the trees are so beautiful in downtown. Would you consider keeping the lights up year round? So Michelle, I am guessing you logged in after the original or the beginning of my session tonight, and I will just share with you the good news They're not going to be up year-round, but they're going to be up during the kind of roughly the daylight savings time period. So from November-ish through March-ish. Now that's a new change that we announced, or I was able to announce tonight, and we're excited about that. And I think that will probably mostly meet people's needs. Let's see, how are my New Year's resolutions holding up? And that doesn't have a name. Does that mean that you guys just made that one up? Maybe?
Maybe.
Yeah. Okay, I'll skip it for now. If there's not a name, that means the staff are trying to trick me into answering the question. All right, from Facebook, from Carlin. Excited to hear about the splash pad at Universal Plaza. You know, this is one of the most requested amenities or features for the city, and so I'm really excited that we're going to have a splash pad in Universal Plaza that will be interactive and really be hopefully a centerpiece for community gatherings for many decades to come. Let's see, from Nicole, how does the city decide which roads to plow during snow? So we actually have a specific plan that describes what roads are priority, and we can put information in the chat on Facebook about that so you can review the details. But in general, you could think about, the way we triage and think about what are the priorities are, first of all, traditionally very treacherous areas that are critical to like emergency transportation. So for example, we don't have a hospital in Tigard, but routes to get ambulances, for example, out of Tigard to and towards the closest hospitals, that's an example of the kinds of things that get prioritized. So one area in particular that I know is a priority because of that, you might not think of as kind of an immediate Tigard priority, but it is because of that, is the off-ramp to Boone's Ferry right off of southbound I-5 and at exit 291 on I-5. That's a very steep area, the 72nd Boone's Ferry area there, going up to the freeway. That's a critical transportation route for emergency services. So that's an area that gets a lot of attention quickly, but there's areas, I'm just using that as an example of one that, about how we prioritize things. And then there's areas that are just traditionally major problems, and so some of those, if they're on major streets or streets that are important for whatever it may be, then that is how they get prioritized. So staff, can we get that in the chat? Yes, all right. From Trish, looks like she loves Tigard too. Excellent. I hope everyone watching tonight loves Tigard.
Mr. Mayor, that goes back to the question, how are your New Year's resolutions holding up?
Oh, back to my New Year's resolutions. So we don't have any other questions that have been typed in. We're back to my resolutions.
We're at the important ones right now.
Yeah, the important ones. So my New Year's resolutions, I have a resolution that was not from New Year's, but that's carrying over, and that is around making somewhat healthier food choices. So I'm continuing that endeavor, and actually did pretty well through the holidays on that resolution. So we're continuing that for 2022, and I anticipate a lot longer. All right, Sarah, we got a question coming in. Yeah. How's the city paying for what?
The new mental health clinician that she saw the KGW feature on the city's.
Yeah.
Yep.
So a question about how we're paying for the mental health clinician that is working in the South cities. So that includes Sherwood, Tigard, Tualatin, and Durham and King City. And the answer is that we are funding part of it along with those other jurisdictions. So we are providing part of the funding, and other jurisdictions are providing it as well. It's a program that we think is important, and given how many of our police calls involve a behavioral health component, this is frankly something I talked about even before I became mayor. I talked about during my mayoral campaign. It even came up in the Tigard Times endorsement discussion when they ended up endorsing me as something that I think we just need to be much better at as a community. We need to be much better as a country at treating and caring for people with behavioral and mental health and addiction challenges. So this is one way. I will state that I don't think sending police to many of those calls is the right way to be handling them. I've been pretty outspoken about that as well. And frankly, our police officers would be the first to say that they're not necessarily the most well equipped. So when we can equip them with a mental health professional that's got a graduate degree, that can improve things. So let's see, we've got a question from Beverly about why the city does not allow Ridwell. So first of all, I'll take a couple steps back. That is not just a city decision. Ridwell very clearly meets the definitions in Oregon. This is different than the state of Washington, where they started operating, but they meet the criteria for basically being a solid waste, a manager of solid waste in Oregon, and that requires and puts them in an entire regulatory structure that I don't think they have been prepared for and have been kind of fighting against, at least initially, to just sort of kind of like Uber and Lyft did in the early days, saying they weren't regulatable, they weren't a taxi, they didn't have employees, all those kinds of things. So I view at least what I've seen behavior-wise and communication-wise from Ridwell kind of sees and feels like that. With that said, Ridwell offers a service that right now our franchise solid waste haulers have not been offering, but that's not necessarily because they're not willing to offer those. They've been pretty clear with us, both Waste Management and Pride Disposal, which are our two solid waste franchisors, or franchisees, excuse me. They have been very clear that they're willing to offer whatever services we want to work into their agreements. So it's not that those services can't be offered, and Ridwell could choose to comply with all of the regulatory framework from the state and the metro regional government. Thus far, they've I think had kind of some discussions indicating they would, and other discussions or other actions kind of indicating they might not, and or that their actions are not consistent with their words. All that to say, we need to figure out how to recycle more. I will also say that I worry about recycling of any kind ending up in landfills when there's not a group or organization that's willing to take them on the other end. So, recycling works when you have a market, or at least someone that's willing to take it for free and reuse it. Our haulers have been in a position of having to pay people to take recycling recently. So what that means to all of us is that we all pay more in our rates because we're recycling, but they're having to pay to get rid of it, instead of 10 years ago when they were able to sell it for money, which made our rates for garbage and solid waste lower. Let's see, from Facebook, Tigard does a great job to keep Gardy Street clear. This confirms your statement that steep intersections with close access to fire stations are accessible. Thank you for confirming that. I appreciate that. Let's see. What is the city doing to address flooding on the Fano Creek Trail? And that is from Jerry on Twitter. So during large storm events that involve a lot of water, the Fano Creek Trail in places is going to be flooded. And it's going to be flooded because it's in the floodway. And that's where the water goes. During times that are not during a major storm, we have had issues with flooding on Fano Creek, particularly up by the Shoals Ferry undercrossing. And I've actually done a lot of work in the beginning of my first term as mayor, or my term as mayor, to work with Clean Water Services to address the causes of that, which were primarily beavers in Fano Creek. And they have placed and continue to maintain some, I would call, well, they're called beaver deceivers. They're basically something that you insert into a beaver dam that makes the beaver, well, the beaver doesn't know that the water's getting through, because if they did, they wouldn't like that. It goes at the bottom of the beaver dam, and it allows the water to flow through the dam, even though the beaver thinks that they're stopping all the water. So maintaining those, and then also kind of doing maintenance around the beaver dams is something that we've done to try to address flooding on the Fano Creek Trail. But in some places, it is going to be flooded because it's in the floodway. Let's see, Jeremy on Facebook, any plans for the old Cafe Allegro space downtown? He really misses that place. I believe, I don't know for sure, but I believe that it's changed hands. I know the building was for sale, and I thought I'd heard somebody had purchased it, but I don't know a lot more details. Jeremy, if you give us your contact info, I'm going to guess that our economic development manager, Lloyd Purdy, can probably give you the latest info we have on that space, and so I'll ask the staff to get your contact info and question over to our economic development folks. Let's see, Michael Antonelli, would Pride and Waste Management be willing to provide these services only to those who want the service, or would this require a rate increase for all residents? Well, Michael, that's a question and probably an option. As you can imagine, there's a relationship between, the cost of doing it and how many customers are requesting it. Through our franchises, we have generally required that the service be provided or available to everybody. And that's really kind of an equity issue. If we start to say, well, we're only gonna do the best job at recycling, or recycling the most things, if you can afford to pay for it, that just raises a number of questions and challenges. But as you point out, it will likely cost more of some sort to have those things managed. And so I think it's a good question. It's probably a policy discussion and an evaluation of the cost differences between those two, and how that would all play out. We also don't have, another thing we hear a lot about, Michael, is food scraps. We don't have food scraps composting in our yard debris bins. That's actually a service that I know Pride Disposal, in my last meeting with them, I was on site over the summer. In fact, I was there when it was so hot. It was during one of the 15 degree days. I was out there, so I remember it well. But they have an interest in providing the sort of the food scrap service, but that's not something that we have built into our structure right now either, which will cost more for us to have. The way the solid waste agreements work is we have a narrow window of profit that the franchisee is to make, and it's 8 to 12%. So that's the return on investment that they can expect, and if it's below 8%, then we end up the following year having to raise rates to get them there, and if it's over 12%, then their rates get cut to compensate for that. So just the basic math of it, but that literally means that every single thing we ask them to do extra just costs us extra. It's not like we're going to get something for free, so it just doesn't work like that. So I hope that, Michael, that helps answer that question. But there will be more dialogue on those topics, and the city's already working on studying a number of those questions, and by studying, it's figuring out how much more it would cost to offer different things, how many people want different services, and what are they willing to pay for them. So, that's the kind of information that council needs to make a more informed decision about all of that. What other questions do we have rolling in? We just had, what time is it? It is, wow, we've been rolling. It is 7:20, we're 50 minutes in here. Can you guys make it all the way to 7:30 and keep me busy? What do we have? We got anything else rolling in?
We're all caught up for now, Mr. Mayor.
All caught up, Tigard? All right.
We had a comment about the Cafe Allegro building, that Live Edge Echo Salon is doing a build out on the Cafe Allegro building.
Live Edge Echo Salon is doing a build out. Okay, so that's not information I verified, but it sounds like somebody more knowledgeable than me is putting that into the chat on this topic, and so I will restate it that that's what's been said, but I don't have that independently verified. What else do we have? Any other questions or comments for me tonight, Tigard? I'm going to be carefully traveling to the U.S. Conference of Mayors meeting in a week in Washington, D.C., so hopefully I'll get some interesting information there. Sometimes we even get to meet with, actually we met with President Trump a couple years ago, right before the COVID pandemic started. So I don't know whether there will be meetings with President Biden, but that sometimes happens. Sometimes there's not a lot of notice before that happens. So we get, while we're there, we get a, hey, you've got 36 hours to do X, Y, Z. I'm guessing that with the pandemic that having a couple hundred mayors in the White House may not be what they have in mind, who all just came in on airplanes. That's probably not what they're going to be going for this year, but sometimes that happens. So, any final comments or questions?
We are all caught up.
We're all caught up?
Yep.
Okay, Tigard, thank you for the time tonight. I appreciate you tuning in, and have a great evening.